But I want to tell you a little bit about sort of the inspiration we take in Oxford, which is slightly different. And also try and plug the new book that just came out before Christmas, The Perfect Meal, written with my then postdoc Bettina Becerras-Fissmann, who's now in Wageningen. Really about applying the latest in neuroscience, psychological science, to our understanding of food and of drink. And really taking as our role our sort of test bed, kind of the modernist restaurant. We think lots of interesting things go on there. You can try things in, if you can find a chef to work with, that you couldn't try as part of a big food company, or at least it would be much harder to do within the confines of a big company. But kind of chefs are their own bosses, and if you can convince them of a nugget of some bit of science that might change the way that their consumers perceive the food that they serve, they might put it on the menu next week, next month, and you might have real diners paying real money in a real environment for real food, and you can see what works and what doesn't. But ultimately what we hope is that search for this kind of perfect meal, what makes it, the factors behind it. When tested in these modernist restaurants, the best ideas there will feed through eventually to the supermarket, to the home environment, in much the same way that, kind of all the latest technology in Formula One cars, the best of that does filter through to the cars we buy in the showrooms. It takes a year or two, but it comes through. So it's kind of the sort of Formula One model of food development. And so for us, the kind of inspiration is kind of captured very nicely from this quote from MKF Fisher from an article a few years ago. Talking about this perfect moment, that once at least in the life of every human, whether he be brute or trembling daffodil, comes a moment of complete gastronomic satisfaction. It is, I'm sure, as much a matter of spirit as of body. Everything's right, nothing jars. There's a kind of harmony with every sensation and emotion, which we've heard about, melted into one chord of well-being. We've all had that kind of experience of a truly wonderful, memorable meal. And the question is, what made it? And can you extract anything from the factors that lead up to that moment and apply them in a broader context, not to make every one of our food moments that memorable, but to just kind of raise the baseline. That's the aspiration, at least. And sure, there are challenges here, because I think each one of us, if asked about what made our perfect meal, some would say, it was that 3 Michelin star restaurant, I'm kind of a gastro tourist. I came all the way to Denmark to go to Noma, and that for me was my perfect meal. But for others in the room, it might be, in a picnic, in the summertime, by the seaside. That can be the perfect meal. Very, very different things. And the question is there anything common there that we can extract that affects people, all sorts of people, in a similar way? Can we extract the generalizations and then think about applying them? And in this search, I think we're lucky at the moment, or at least in Oxford, we're very lucky to be part of a kind of a food culture that's changed a lot over the last few decades. Go back to the 60s or 70s, and England was certainly not known for its food or its restaurants. That has completely changed now. I don't think we've got necessarily more Michelin stars than France, but maybe we're giving it a close run. And not only do we have a lot of culinary innovation, perhaps because we don't have such a strong food traditional history, perhaps, we see a lot of innovative, i.e. modernist or molecular type chefs who are starting to become increasingly interested not just on the sourcing of the ingredients and the preparation and perhaps the presentation on the plate, but really, for the first time, first generation of chefs, I think, who are thinking about the mind of their diner. And you'll get that very clearly if you were to go to the Fat Duck restaurant. Has been the world's best restaurant before Noma pushed it off the pedestal and kept it off. About 45 minutes from Oxford, so it's a kind of a nice place, close enough to work with, and they feed us far better than we feed them when they come to Oxford. Heston Blumenthal, 3 Michelin star chef, his kind of main restaurant. You open the menu. Nowadays it's just a tasting menu, you can't choose anything really. But the first thing that hits you is the mission statement of the chef about what he's trying to do in the kitchen. And what is he stressing here? Eating is the only thing that we do that involves all of the senses. And I don't think that we realise just how much influence the senses actually have on the way that we process the information from mouth to brain. So many things. First we register taste, then we get smells, then we get textures and metallics and spices and astringents. But beyond all those basic sensory processes of the food, what we get is emotion, memory, all these other layers of meaning that help change and really inform what that dish will mean to a particular diner. And for him, it's really about knowing about what's going on in here, and not just what's going on in here, that hopefully gives him the edge, or a kind of a unique selling point, if you will, in amongst chefs. But what he, in a way, started, along with him, Ferran Adria, another chef we've been lucky enough to work with, again, stressing the same thing. Cooking is probably the most multi-sensual of arts, and I try to stimulate all the senses. And these chefs are doing it not just in the food, on the plate or in the glass, but also increasingly in the environments in which we eat and drink. It's a whole kind of experience economy, both in the body and surrounding it, that these chefs are starting to play with. And the young chefs now who've been through the Fat Duck or El Bulli, who are starting to pop up to start their own restaurants, there's a whole generation of them who are saying, yeah, I want to know what's going on here. I want to know about expectations, because they're really important to how people experience my food. It's far more than just me as a chef getting the seasoning right, because I've realised that doesn't tell the whole story. I want to know about the mind, the brain, expectations, perceptions, emotions, and so on. And these young chefs are sort of hungry for knowledge and wanting to work, I think, with the sensory scientists and with the psychologists to try and up their game and deliver something a bit different, a bit more memorable, and as we heard, perhaps on occasion a little bit more healthy too. Though these kind of chefs aren't known for their low-calorie meals. That's kind of low down their restaurant agenda, but probably in their commercial spin-offs, they may play more to that card. And the sort of things that we talk to these chefs about are kind of the three rules that kind of govern the way we think in the lab. So our lab's all about the senses: hearing, vision, touch, taste and smell. But how all those senses separate on the outside, the skin, the ears, the nose, all come together inside the brain. We want to know the rules by which our brain combines the senses. Not just in the case of food. It could be when you're watching a movie at the cinema. It could be when you're driving. In all sorts of situations, our brain combines all the senses, and the hope is by knowing the rules of interaction and integration, some of which aren't necessarily intuitive to us, you can then help to start to design things differently. So we do training days for the kitchen staff, for the waiters at the Fat Duck restaurant and elsewhere, trying to tell them something about the multi-sensory science of perception. And these three rules govern a lot of the work that we do. They're kind of the best case scenario, I suppose. You don't always get them, but there is something to aim for in one's kind of development work of products or packs or experiences. The first one in the top right, the idea of super additivity, the idea that sometimes our brains combine very faint sensations, like a faint smell that I can't even tell which bottle has the aroma, a very faint taste, so I don't even know I'm tasting something in my mouth. But those two faint sensations together give you a much richer flavour experience, one that is much bigger than the sum of the parts. That's something that, of course, the flavour houses want to know about. The firmenishes get very excited when they see this kind of idea, because they can think about how to deliver flavours far more cheaply to market, giving the same perceptual experience with less cost in terms of the raw ingredients. What everyone, I suppose, is trying to avoid is what happens on the bottom left, kind of the idea of suppression. That sometimes when our brain says, what I expected and what I got was too different, that disconfirmation of expectation we just heard about, the result is like, I just don't like that. It's not what I thought I was going to get, as in the schnapps and buckthorn flayed shoulder of reindeer or whatever it was. Or other examples might be the clear cola drink, clear tab colas that, people love cola. They don't have any aversion to clear sparkling drinks, think Sprite, 7-Up, sparkling water, but put those two things together and they just don't match. I saw a clear drink, I was expecting Sprite or lemonade, I got cola, disconfirmation, it's in my mouth, that's scary, it could be poisonous, and the product is withdrawn from the market. So that's what happens when you start thinking about designing for the senses separately. Everyone's trying to avoid it, but maybe those large percentage of new product failures tell you that the sort of suppression response is far more prevalent than maybe we realise. And finally, the most fun one, probably the idea of sensory dominance, that sometimes our brains just use one sense, normally the eyes, to tell us everything we think we need to know. And classically done with the wine tasters, better, the more expert the wine taster, the better. Give them the glass of white wine, coloured artificially red, And what do they smell in the glass? Sometimes, not always, but sometimes they smell the tobacco, the berries, the chocolate, the stone fruits that aren't there at all. They're showing visual dominance over smell, over taste, over flavour. New Zealand wine experts are no better in this, as Wendy Parr has shown. Almost in a way, the more expert you are, perhaps the more likely you are to be fooled by the colour. So when you see that glass of red wine, you can tell, oh, it's been in the bottle for 2 or 3 years. It was grown on the sunny side of the slope. It was a good hot summer. It's been over-extracted. All that goes through the expert's mind, sets up even stronger expectations that maybe are harder to override. So 3 kinds of rules that govern our work in the lab, whether we're thinking about cars, paints and fragrance, or food and packaging. And those rules, I think, apply regardless of the sense. And this, for me, is the real important kind of we had a paradigm shift or step change, really, would be this, that studying, I guess, taste and flavour is difficult because we adapt, we get full up, we might poison people, ethics is harder. So I think food science research, just by its very nature, is probably going to be a bit slower to find insights. It's harder to do the experiments, hence they get done more slowly. Studying hearing and vision is that easy. You stick somebody in front of a computer, leave them there for an hour, and you've got 1,000 measurements of something. And if the idea is, if what you learn about how the brain combines hearing and vision while in front of a computer, probably the same rules might apply when you give people something to eat. And that was the idea of superadditivity. It wasn't discovered, I guess, in the sensory science food lab. It was discovered in hearing and vision, but the same rule, same thinking applies to food. And you get maybe a few years advantage, I think, in the best case, in terms of your understanding. This is our own personal example of that. It's a dry, crisp product, the Pringles potato chip. And we were doing research on hearing and touch, on how you can make people think that their washing is softer when it comes out of the washing machine by changing its sound. Because now probably you can hear, some of you in the front can hear my shirt. You can almost feel what it would be like, soft or starched, without even touching it. We were doing those experiments on the one side, basic hearing, touch research. We were working on iced teas and brain-enhancing margarines on the other. And we thought, let's just put those 2 things together. And I think came up with a new kind of test for looking at crunchiness, crispness, freshness. And where you here see a Pringles potato chip, you can insert an apple. So my colleague Luisa D'Amate, who used to be in the lab in Oxford, has been doing exactly this Pringle experiment with different kinds of apple in northern Italy, looking at perceived crispness, freshness of the apple as a function of the sound you hear. What we do in the lab is have people coming in, we'd give them 2 packs of Pringles, about 180, for hungry undergraduates. Sometimes they'd eat the lot, but there was a spittoon there, you could bite and spit if you wanted. And each time the participant bit into a fresh or a stale Pringle, we could change the sound of crunching that they heard, their own sound of crunch, and by so doing, change their perception of this kind of tactile attribute of crispness or of crunchiness by about 15%. Taking a paradigm or an insight from the other senses that are easy to study, applying it to food, I think allows you to do things in different ways than anyone who's been looking at the sound of food since they first started looking back in 1957, 58. And this kind of test now is used in-house by, so the apple producers of northern Italy are getting quite fond of it, but also the big players, Nestle, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, when they're thinking about introducing a new biscuit or breakfast cereal or crisp or cracker, they used to go around baking some new stuff, trying it out on consumers. Do you like it? Do you not? Okay, get rid of that batch. Let's make some new food, try it on consumers. No. It's a very kind of slow innovation process, whereas here you can map out the whole of sound space for a food product, find out what people like to hear when they bite into a food, and then go to the kitchens with that specification and say, can you bake or make that thing? Sometimes you can't. They'll just laugh at you and say, that's impossible. There's no way you could physically make that sound. But other times, at least they know in which direction to head. And so here, in a way, what we're doing is taking a kind of sonic design for dry or for wet crisp products. And the very same sort of test you might see in a car company when they're thinking about the sound of a car door. Again, they don't build all the car doors and see what they sound like. They generate the sound they want first, and then figure out how to engineer it into the door. Same kind of psychoacoustic approach from cars to food. And for us, as I was saying over lunch earlier, one of our kind of key drivers is thinking about technology. So it's about knowing about the mind of the consumer and how to bring technology into the equation. Kind of a shift from molecular gastronomy, which you might think of as technology in the back of house or in the kitchen, new cooking techniques, processing techniques, new ingredients, to what we see as the future, or a possible future, which is technology at the front of house, and how that might change the experience. So here's just one example of a kind of a sensory app created by some colleagues in Japan. You've got your crisps, they don't taste quite the way you want. You can download the app, the Evercrisp, and as you crunch, you can actually change the sound of your food, make it crispier, fresher. Apple didn't let them launch it, sadly, but that's kind of the idea we're playing in. Sometimes these things are just wacky, especially if they come from the Far East. They tend to be wackier than most, I think. And here's another version of the same idea. Sound plays more of a role in food than ever we realised. Heston on the right would say, sound is the forgotten flavour sense. We might think about the other four senses, but most food scientists, when quizzed, will put sound as the bottom of their list. Regular consumers too, and yet it's more important. And we can bring that sound into the dining experience here inside the Fat Duck. It could be a chocolate mousse that is silent, in which you sprinkle some popping candy. Silent, silent, whoosh. A burst of sound that draws your attention to the mouth. Or it could be this, the Sonic headphones, Mark 1. We have a journalist wearing the Sonic headphones, biting a carrot dipped into a sauce. The microphone picks up the sound, changes it. Is this the new cutlery? Is the question. But knives, forks, spoons. Why not have something to enhance the experience of what you are eating? That was on the menu for 2 months in 2006-07, and then withdrawn. Kind of if you go to this restaurant for your once-in-a-lifetime meal, must be about €400 now a person. It kind of could be a very romantic occasion, and sometimes ladies of a certain age get their hair done, also for their big night out. And then the waiter comes and says, will you put these on? And it's impossible to look alluring and sexy with them on. You feel self-conscious, and the benefit in the crunch is not worth the cost to your kind of self-esteem. So it was withdrawn. So it's a slow process, but we're going to come back to how this did reappear in the marketplace. And all the way to neurogastronomy, which is a kind of popular term. The idea that, well, we can just forget about what consumers say altogether, and diners. Let's just stick them in a brain scanner, give them some stuff to eat or drink, see what lights up. We'll tell them it's an expensive wine, and lo and behold, the reward centres light up, all that blood flowing through, telling us the neural correlates of, of price or the brand. Where is the Coca-Cola centre in the McClure study from 2004? I think this research is interesting. It's just not the sort of stuff that we want to do, and I think the claims you can make on the basis of it are often exaggerated. Remember, you're lying flat on your back with your head clamped still, with a tube in your mouth. You cannot swallow because that will lead to a movement in the brain scan. So you've got this liquid squirted in your mouth, washed away with artificial saliva. So it's not really a tasting experience. So I kind of want to say what we know about the brain is inspiring. It does tell us some stuff, gives us directions for research. But I don't think anyone has ever had their best meal experience lying in one of those. Not even close, not even a good one. So it tells us some stuff that's on occasion interesting. But if we can't capture the thing we're interested in, that perfect meal, then maybe forget about this. And I guess my criticism is also for the sorts of things that we do in Oxford, and maybe that go on here. It's not just the neuroimages that I think are on occasion misdirected. Here we have someone looking at the wine and the influence of the wine glass on the wine drinking experience. And we kind of isolated all the stuff. So we've got the subject with their head clamped. We like that. Keeps them nice and still. We have the blindfold so they can't see anything. We have the wine glass agitated gently on a mechanical stand so people can't feel anything. I want to know what happens, how much do you enjoy? Again, you've lost something. We do this in Oxford sometimes, but you've kind of lost something. It's not like real wine drinking experiences here. So maybe we need to look elsewhere for our inspiration. A different approach, in a way, to the kind of experiments one wants to do. And starting for us, really, is just thinking, well, what was your perfect meal experience? Just analyse that as a starting point. And there are two that, for me, stand out from the last 2 years. One of them is this, Le Chateaubriand in Paris. Looks like a regular cafe recommended by some friend. He recommended another restaurant the night before that was pretty Japanese chefs with clipboards and no soft furnishings. So we weren't convinced. You turn up here, it just looks like a bistro or something, nothing special, until you walk through the curtains late in the night. And within a course or two, it becomes clear that these kind of modernist chef collective on a mission and doing some really amazing things. And 12 courses for only 60 euros, 100 with wine. So it's much better than expected. And that, for me, is very often part of that really amazing experience. It's better than you expected. When it's a disconfirmation of expectation, but in a very positive direction, can lead to something really memorable. But it was cheap. Coming from Yorkshire in England is also kind of part of that great experience. So I know it's part of the experience, but again, I can't study this, really. Because now I've told you about this great restaurant. If you were to go there, you wouldn't have the same experience. It's spoilt for you, I'm sorry about that. But you couldn't be positively surprised in the same way that I was. So it's part of what I'm interested in, but it's not something I can study, unfortunately. And my final gripe about the sort of research that we have been doing for years is sort of this, that I think sensory scientists and psychologists interested in food like myself tend to focus just on that moment. People are actually tasting something in their mouth, on a moment of perception and nothing else. And if I think back to those great meal experiences, my pleasure is not so much in the moment, in the 3 or 4 hours of the food, but it's in the anticipation building up to that moment, and it's in the storytelling and the memories afterwards. So the really great meal kind of extends in time beyond the pure perceptual moment, involves expectations and flavour memories. And flavour memories is something that seems really interesting, but which people haven't, as far as I know, studied so much as yet. And I'll give you an example. We're working with a chef in London, Joseph Youssef, who pops up in Maida Vale in north-west London. Molecular gastronomist, trained in the Fat Duck, multi-course tasting menu. He's got some dishes he's really proud of as a chef. People enjoy it in the moment, but we've started sending out questionnaires 3 weeks after people came to the restaurant. Say, what do you remember? What was it that stood out about that experience for you? And much to the chef's disappointment, it's not the food. His best dishes, people don't remember them. They kind of fictionalise what was in it. What they remember is is when the waitress comes to the table and sprays something over the food. Quite what they sprayed, the smell of earth in this case, they can't remember, but it was that action. The kind of theatrics is what stays in people's memory in this case. And so whether as a chef you want to design things just for that moment in the restaurant, or you want to design, curate experiences that stay and stick, is kind of an interesting one. And then again with Heston we think, well, how does he take these kind of ideas about extending the meal experience? I think very often the chefs have the intuitions that can lead to interesting experiments. So if you go to the Fat Duck, if you're lucky enough to get a table, and there might be 100,000 people phoning up for a busy Saturday, you phone 2 months in advance for the date that you want. You get a table, say, a month later, a card will come through your door saying, don't forget, a month from today, Heston's invited you to dinner. And you sort of think, the first thing is bizarre. Why would he send me a reminder? It was so hard to get the table that I'm never going to forget, am I? Did he think I really would not turn up to the restaurant? And anyway, he now charges £300 on my credit card before I go, so does he care whether I actually turn up? I don't know. But the point of that card is not to remind you, is that that card is scented with a perfume. You get a smell, it's kind of pleasant, sort of familiar, but hopefully hard to identify what that smell is. Then when you walk through the door of the restaurant you see here in Bray, if the waiting staff have been doing their job properly, the frame of that door has been rubbed with the same scent. There's a smell of recognition, something familiar. And then at the end of the meal, as the bill is presented, you're also given a small bag of sweets. And that smell is, I think, a Firmenich creation of the smell of the sweet shop of our youth. So it's playing with memory, and it's taking a meal experience and extending it a month before it starts to when you go home after your meal, you remember the occasion, you eat the sweets, and smell is used there to kind of prolong the thing. Okay, so I have to go to this dreadful picture. The other great meal experience that I think we can work on, that chefs intuitively have picked up on. This is the Spence family on their summer holiday in Colombia. It's hard to do this picture due justice. We were there for a month. Lots of fancy restaurants in the big cities in the Caribbean coast. But you ask my brother, my parents, on this trip or the trip several years before, what was your best meal of this whole holiday? And it's this. We're in the middle of a roundabout with the taxi drivers honking. It's about 30 degrees on the Caribbean coast. We're sat on plastic chairs. We're eating from a styrofoam mug with a plastic spoon. It's just all completely wrong. We're eating kind of a prawn cocktail. A dish that is so in the 70s, in the UK mindset, you could never serve it with a straight face now. But somehow here, in this situation, it is wonderful, it is memorable, and it has been for both trips. What is it? I guess it's kind of emotion again. It's with your family, it's the holiday. It's almost this kind of Provençal sort of a rosé moment. Something about, you know, when we're on the holidays and we're looking at our lover's eyes, maybe not Denny here, but someone, you know, put your own face there, and that wine will taste wonderful. It may well taste wonderful. But you've got the smell of the sea, the sound of the salty sea air, or vice versa. We might like that wine so much, it's perfect. We buy some bottles, we bring them home to share with our friends and family on a winter night, maybe like tonight. And it's not the same. It's the same wine, but it's not the same experience. And you think something was lost, maybe in the hold, it was very cold, the pressure changed, the wine has changed. And we think, no, the wine has not changed, but the atmosphere in which you drink has changed. You're no longer necessarily with the family, you're no longer on a holiday in a good mood with all the seaside charm. That's a ubiquitous experience, and yet there's very little research on it. So that's one that got us interested. How do we capture that? How do we capture the Provençal rosé moment? And there are two ways. Part of the story is this. The guy I just showed you is Denis Martin. He has 2 Michelin stars, based in Vevey, just by Nestlé HQ and down the road from Charlie Chaplin's final retreat. 2 Michelin stars, he wants his 3rd. And he's discovered over the years that no matter how brilliant the food, I mean, it's all locally sourced, beautifully presented, in season kind of stuff. No matter how hard he works on the food itself, his diners just didn't seem to enjoy the experience as much as he thought his efforts deserved. And what he would see, in his words, are all these kind of stiff and formal Swiss businessmen coming for their corporate dinners on expenses, all kind of buttoned up. And he could sort of see that they weren't going to enjoy it. They were in the wrong mindset, they were in the wrong mood. So what to do? What he introduced is this. When you go to the restaurant, it's a single sitting. There's nothing on the table, just a white tablecloth and this object. No cutlery, no glassware, no nothing. So we're all sitting at 7 o'clock, waiting. Said, it was a 7 o'clock sharp start, we're all here, and nothing happens. And you know, people will wait for a minute or two, wait a bit longer, nothing happens. Until somebody will get curious and say, I wonder what that is. Is it salt, shaker, pepper, both combined in one? They'll pick it up, tilt it, and it'll go, Mrr. It's a moo cow, it's a €1 toy. But as soon as somebody picks it up, tilt it, they're surprised by the moo, they're shocked by it, they start giggling. The next table will then pick up their moo cow, and you have a room full of mooing cows, a restaurant full of giggling diners, you've got the mental palate cleanser, and that is when the first dish comes out. Very simple, very effective, very intuitive. And the question then for the scientist is, how could we capture that? Not in a Swiss moo cow, but maybe is there like other kinds of mental palate cleansers, like music, really uplifting, or one of those video clips of like the quintuplet of babies, and one starts giggling and the next one giggles and that starts the next one, and they just can't stop themselves, and no one can see that video, I think, without themselves smiling. Would that be the simplest way for anyone to improve the taste of the meal? So this is the chef capturing the mood enhancing the mood to enhance the taste of the food, part of the Provençal, part of that great meal experience. And this is the other side, the sensory side. We're back in Bray, about as far from the coast as you can get in the UK. We're serving seafood, and it's hard to capture that kind of the Provençal moment. But how do we do it, or how does Heston do it? Brings the dish to the table looking like the sea with sand and foam and seaweed and seafood. And on the other hand, the waiter comes with a conch shell, out of which dribble some iPod headphones. Very discreet this time. You can put them in, and you will hear the sounds of the sea with the waves crashing on the beach, the seagulls overhead. And they've thought carefully about how many seagulls. Not to be too dense so that you can hear that and project your own memories onto it. So it kind of allows a bit of filling in. So the story goes. And when that happens, we've done the experiments with Heston at science festivals to show this seafood tastes significantly better with the sounds of the sea than with modern jazz or restaurant cutlery noises or the sound of farmyard chickens. So it's again capturing the sensory element. We might even spray a smell of a salty sea air over the diner to enhance. And what also happens here, this has been a signature dish on the menu for 6 years now. And it maybe is the first successful example of technology at table. In this case, it's the chef bringing the technology to you for a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But what works here, and this definitely does work, has brought some people to tears. And what you see is people are talking, they're excited, they're in this really amazing restaurant. The waiter comes out in his best French accent, says, put the headphones in. You put the headphones in, and people are silent. Their attention is on the food. And it's partly just that you're focusing on the food that will make it taste different, perhaps better, as well as this kind of signature sound. I think what works here, the question is how to translate that then to the real world. Or maybe this. Derek says he's got some iPads. There we go. Some of the iPads now are waterproof. You can stick them in the dishwasher, I think, technically. So what else could you do with technology? Reposition the iPad as a table. So I know the sounds of the sea work. I bet also looking at a shimmering kind of seascape would also make the seafood taste better. And here we could have a different kind of backdrop to any of the dishes we might serve. We've tried it for canapes at a few events. I think it kind of works. Better probably things to pick up with, amuse-bouche is probably better than a steak if you want to protect your things. But just what could technology do in the future? Will this happen? I don't know. But if you see the design probes from Electrolux and Philips design, some of their multi-sensory plates that smoke, that illuminate, that play sound, are now being used by chefs like Arzac in Spain and elsewhere. Salad. You don't need a PhD to do that. But sometimes I think what we find is different from the intuitions of the chef. That's when it becomes really interesting. Here's another one. Latte art. Does it make a difference? Yes, it does. Your intuitions go well. And here, a final one. This is a piece, up-and-coming Brazilian chef from Sao Paulo. This is one of his signature dishes. 3 red onions, tapioca, vinegar, green stuff, and things. And we just saw that dish and think, wow, it's visually stunning. And for us, it's got triangles. All those triangles aligned in kind of a nice gestalt, and they're all pointing away from the diner. When triangles point towards you or down, be it on a pizza package or whatever else it might be, people just don't like the food as much. So for us, this is, the chef intuitively put all those triangles in alignment. Was he right or not? Take that image, strip the food from the plate, load it online, and then the chef creates the dish during the day. Overnight, hundreds of consumers rate that dish online, because if expectations is such a big part of the experience, you can measure those expectations online. And here we find about 200, 300 people viewed that dish. And on their technology, handheld technology, you can move your cursor and you can actually rotate this food into any alignment you want. So imagine you're the chef. How would you like this food presented to you? Here it turns out the chef was about right. The optimal orientation for the onions is 4.4 degrees off 12 o'clock. Close enough not to matter. Again, why do we need the scientists here? Well, for this, the very, very final example, if you go to restaurants these days, if you look at the food gastro porn, on any of those sort of websites, you'll see a lot of this asymmetric plating. Very popular. And sort of ask, if you get to speak to the chef, ask them why. It'd be hard to hard to articulate quite why they want to do it. Maybe it's striking, it's different. Is that a good thing? Would people be willing to pay more for only half a plate of food? We find not. Here, ox cheek, mashed potato and seasonal vegetables, centered in the middle of the plate, asymmetric plating, and people are willing to pay far more on eating that dish for the centered plate of exactly the same ingredients. So here at least, there's a discussion to be had about whether the intuitions of the chef or the culinary team were the right ones. And maybe there's a longer job here. Maybe who cares what people will pay today for this dish? I'm a chef who wants to be remembered a decade from now for my amazing plating. And that's what I'm aiming for, eternal fame. So maybe they might still use the asymmetric plating. But at least we've got some evidence easily collected using the psychological sciences to evaluate expectations about food in a different way. And if I can give you this, the very last example, which I've got to mention because it's about fruit and vegetables. Here we have, going from the plating to the whole experience, a type of event that's becoming much more common in the UK, often funded by the drinks and food brands. Experiential marketing, you could call it. We have people given a glass of whiskey, in a black tasting glass, very often, and we take them through 3 different environments. It's like a sensory testing, but not traditionally formal way you do it. 500 people going through central London, Soho, taste the whiskey, rate it in this room with the sound of the English summertime, the birds tweeting, grass on the floor, the smell of grass. Then go upstairs, rate the whiskey in the middle room. We've got tinkling high-pitched piano, tinkling wind chimes coming from the ceiling. Everything in this room is red, because red is sweet, ripe fruit. Everything is round in this room, because round is sweet. Rate the grassiness on the nose, the sweetness of the taste, and the aftertaste. And finally, take your whiskey to this room, and now we have wood on the walls, wood on the floors, a dead tree behind you, the smell of wood, the sound of wood fire, wood instruments, creaking wood doors. Everything woody we could think of, trying to prime you about woodiness. Rate the whiskey again on the nose, the taste, the aftertaste. And the results, that the environment you're in do change by about 15%. Your rating of the nose, the taste, or the texture or aftertaste of that whiskey. Even when you know it's the same drink in the glass. And people were going through this experience, and someone saying, I know it's the same whiskey, I wanted different whiskies in each room, because then you wouldn't know which drink you had and it could change. But for practical reasons, we could not do that. But then people were coming out of this room and saying, look, I gave the whiskey this rating in the room 1, and then this rating, and I can see from my own scorecard that their ratings are completely different. And now restaurants are starting to use this when they serve whiskey, say in the Lake District at one of the top restaurants, Long Clune. They'll bring the whiskey to the table and serve it off a wooden platter to enhance that woody note. Or if you're the British Summer Fruit Federation, is the punchline. This year they took the idea of the sensorium, and when they were trying to sell the strawberries at Wimbledon, they kind of created the whole multi-sensory experiential. Try the strawberries, listen to the sounds of the English summertime. You can hear them online, and they will change people's perception of the taste of the fruit. Easy to do with wines, but I think a lot of these ideas can be translated, hopefully, to the fruit and veg market. So, could go on and on and on and on, but hopefully you get a feeling of why we're excited about food, and why for us, that idea about the perfect meal, what went into it, it can be kind of a powerful cue for innovation by talking to the chefs, and when lucky enough working with the chefs and trying to do experiments, both in the lab that is scientific, very unlike real world, but from there through to the modernist restaurant or the college dining room or the hotel restaurant when we can, to have the kind of the real world experimental situations. It's kind of a rich area, and one where we see a growing number of chefs very interested in collaborating, very interested in wanting to know how to measure the effect of what they're doing, and really interested in the mind and not just the mouth of the diner and also of the consumer. Thank you for your attention.